The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry wasps as I stood frozen in aisle 7, my phone pressed so hard against my ear it left a permanent dent in my cheek. The dial tone mocked me, that hollow, endless sound that would haunt my dreams for years to come. "Marcus?" I whispered into the void, my voice barely audible over the hum of the grocery store's late-night emptiness. "Marcus, please pick up." But I already knew. Deep in my gut, in that place where women's intuition lives and breathes like a caged animal, I already knew he wasn't coming back. 23 minutes and 17 seconds. I'd been counting every single one. That's how long it had been since my husband of 2 years had kissed my forehead with those cold, lying lips and said, "I'll be right back, babe. Just need to take this call from work. You know how demanding the new client is." His mouth had felt like ice against my skin, and now I understood why. They were the lips of a man who was already a ghost, already gone, already planning his escape while I stood there like a fool, believing in promises that meant nothing. I clutched the grocery cart handle until my knuckles turned bone white, staring at the items we'd picked out together just an hour earlier. His favourite cereal. The expensive, organic stuff he insisted was worth the extra $4. The coffee beans he claimed he couldn't function without, imported from some pretentious little farm in Guatemala. Ingredients for the anniversary dinner I was planning to make him tomorrow night, our 2-year anniversary dinner, steaks from the butcher counter, asparagus, that ridiculously overpriced wine he'd put in the cart with a wink and a "we deserve to celebrate." The irony wasn't lost on me standing there surrounded by the remnants of a life that was apparently already decomposing. "Mom?" A voice cut through my panic. I looked up to see a stock boy, maybe 19 years old, with concerned eyes and a name tag that read Tyler. He was holding a price gun like it might protect him from whatever breakdown he was witnessing. "Ma'am, we're closing in 10 minutes. Do you need help with anything?" I tried to speak, but the words caught in my throat like broken glass. What was I supposed to say? "My husband abandoned me here like a stray dog. I'm having an existential crisis in your dairy section." The man I trusted with my entire future just drove away while I was buying groceries for a marriage that apparently ended 23 minutes ago. "I'm fine," I lied, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Just give me a minute." Tyler nodded and shuffled away, but I could feel his eyes on me as I stood there, paralyzed by the magnitude of what was happening. The automatic doors whooshed open and closed behind me as I finally worked up the courage to abandon my cart and step outside into the parking lot that would become the graveyard of my naive beliefs about love. The asphalt stretched before me like a vast, empty ocean under the sickly yellow glow of the streetlights. Our parking spot, the one where Marcus had left me with a kiss and a promise, was nothing but empty space and oil stains. I stood there, grocery bags cutting into my palms, and felt something inside me crack. Not break. That would come later, just crack, like the first fissure in a dam that's about to burst. "Mum, are you all right?" The security guard materialized beside me like a concerned angel in a polyester uniform. His name tag read Robert, and he had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. I must have looked exactly like what I was. A woman abandoned, lost, completely and utterly shattered. "My husband," I finally managed, my voice coming out as a croak. "He was supposed to wait for me. Our car." I gestured helplessly at the empty space, feeling foolish and small and so incredibly, devastatingly naive. Robert's expression softened with pity, and I hated it. I hated the way he looked at me, like I was some pathetic creature who couldn't see what was obvious to everyone else. I hated that he probably had a wife at home who would never have to stand in the parking lot at 11 p.m, wondering if her husband was coming back. "How long has he been gone?" Robert asked gently, like he was talking to a child who'd lost her parent at the mall. 23 minutes, I said, checking my phone again. The screen lit up with notifications. Missed calls from my sister, a text from my mum asking how dinner went, a reminder about a dentist appointment next week. Normal life things. Things that belonged to the woman I'd been an hour ago, the woman who still believed her husband loved her. 24 minutes now, I corrected, because precision mattered when your world was ending. Robert didn't say what we both knew, that 24 minutes was long enough for a man to drive across town. Long enough to pack a bag. Long enough to file papers. Long enough to end a marriage without having the basic human decency to say goodbye to your wife's face. I called 17 times. 17 times I listened to his voicemail message, that cheerful, lying voice saying, "Hey, you've reached Marcus. Leave me a message and I'll get back to you." Each time I hung up without speaking, because what was I supposed to say? Please come back and pretend you love me. Please explain why I'm standing in a parking lot at midnight, holding groceries for a future that apparently doesn't exist. On the 18th call, something inside me snapped. When that voicemail message played, I didn't hang up. I spoke. "Marcus," I said, my voice deadly calm, "I know you can hear this. I know you're listening to every single one of these messages, and I want you to remember this moment. Remember that you left your wife stranded in a grocery store parking lot because you're too much of a coward to end things like a man. Remember that you threw away 2 years of marriage, 2 years of me loving you unconditionally, 2 years of me believing every lie that came out of your mouth. But most of all, Marcus, remember this. Karma has a very long memory and she's extremely patient. This isn't over." I hung up and immediately felt better. Not good. I wouldn't feel good for a very long time, but better. There's something powerful about finally saying what you mean instead of begging for scraps of affection from someone who's already checked out. The taxi driver was kind. His name was Ahmed, and he had gentle hands and tired eyes that said he'd seen everything this city had to offer. He didn't ask questions when I climbed into his back seat with tears streaming down my face, and grocery bags full of a life I'd never get to live. He just handed me a box of tissues and asked for my address in accented English that somehow made everything feel less catastrophic. "Bad night?" he asked softly as we pulled away from the store. "The worst," I admitted, watching the parking lot disappear in the rearview mirror. "My husband, he left me there." Ahmed met my eyes in the mirror and shook his head. "Some men," he said, "they don't know what they have until it's gone. But by then, sometimes it's too late." $67. That's what it costs to get home. $67 to learn that love is a luxury some people can't afford to keep, and some people aren't worthy of receiving. The house looked different when we pulled up. Smaller, somehow, like it had shrunk in the few hours I'd been gone. But I could see immediately that something was wrong. The garage door was open, which Marcus never left it, and his side was empty. Not just empty, meticulously cleaned out. His golf clubs were gone, his toolbox, his bike, even the stupid, inflatable pool float shaped like a flamingo that he'd insisted on keeping, just in case we ever get a pool. I paid Ahmed with shaking hands and walked through my own front door like a stranger entering someone else's home. The silence was deafening. It's amazing how a house can feel completely different when you realise the person you shared it with never really wanted to be there in the first place. Every room felt hollow, echoing with the ghosts of conversations we'd never have and futures we'd never share. His closet was half empty, but not in a hurried way. This wasn't a panicked escape. This was methodical, planned, calculated. He'd taken his time, probably, while I was at work that morning, kissing him goodbye and telling him I loved him like I did every single day. While I was at my desk, thinking about our anniversary dinner, he was here, systematically erasing himself from our life. The bathroom told the same story. His toothbrush was gone. His shampoo, the prescription bottle with his name on it that used to sit on the counter. Even his side of the medicine cabinet was empty. How long had he been planning this? Weeks? Months? I found the note on the kitchen counter, propped up against the coffee maker like some sick joke. The coffee maker I'd bought him for his birthday last year, the one he'd claimed was perfect and exactly what he wanted. 2 years of marriage. And he'd reduced our entire relationship to 3 paragraphs of lawyer speak and fake regret written on a piece of paper that probably cost more than my wedding dress. Emma, it began, and even seeing my name in his handwriting made my stomach turn. I'm sorry it had to be this way. I never meant to hurt you, but I can't keep pretending anymore. We both know this hasn't been working for a while now. I filed for divorce. My lawyer will be in touch with the paperwork. I hope someday you'll understand that this is better for both of us. Please don't try to contact me. I think it's better if we make a clean break. Marcus, better for both of us. Better for both of us. I read those words 3 times before they sank in. This coward, this absolute waste of human space, had convinced himself that abandoning his wife in a parking lot was some kind of mercy, that destroying my entire world without warning was somehow an act of kindness. I laughed, actually laughed, standing there in my kitchen at nearly 1 a.m, holding a note that had just detonated my entire existence. The sound was hollow and bitter, echoing off the walls of what used to be our home and was now just a house where I happened to live alone. That's when I saw it. The real twist of the knife. On the counter next to his cowardly goodbye letter was a receipt. A receipt from earlier that day, from Mitchell & Sons Fine Jewellery downtown. The same store where he'd bought my engagement ring 3 years ago, back when he could still look me in the eye and pretend he meant the words coming out of his mouth. But this wasn't for me. This was for someone else. Someone named Sarah, according to the custom inscription he'd requested. To Sarah, my future starts now. Sarah from his office. Sarah, who'd started working there 6 months ago. Sarah, who was 25 and blonde, and didn't have 2 years of marriage baggage weighing her down. Sarah, who probably didn't even know that the man buying her jewellery was still married when he made the purchase. Sarah, who was about to become the star of her very own fairy tale, built on the ashes of mine. I sat on our kitchen floor, my kitchen floor, and cried until I had nothing left. But somewhere between the tears and the rage and the absolute devastation, something else began to grow. Something cold and calculating and infinitely more dangerous than heartbreak. Clarity. For the first time in our entire relationship, I saw Marcus exactly as he was. Not the charming man who'd swept me off my feet at that coffee shop 3 years ago. Not the husband who'd promised to love me in sickness and in health, for better or worse. But a coward. A selfish, weak, pathetic coward who couldn't even end his marriage with basic human dignity. And cowards, I realised as I sat there on that cold tile floor, always get what's coming to them. Sometimes it just takes a little longer than you'd expect. The woman who'd waited in that parking lot was dead. What rose from her ashes was going to be magnificent. I picked myself up from that kitchen floor at 2:47 a.m, and the first thing I did was call Sarah. Her number was easy to find. Marcus had been careless, leaving his work directory open on the laptop he'd forgotten to take. Or maybe he'd left it on purpose, some twisted part of him wanting me to discover his betrayal completely. Either way, Sarah Martinez, marketing coordinator, answered on the 3rd ring with a sleepy, confused, "Hello?" "Sarah," I said, my voice steady as granite. "This is Emma, Marcus's wife." The silence that followed was deafening. I could practically hear her world shifting, recalibrating as she realised she'd been living in a lie. I don't understand," she whispered, and I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "The man who bought you jewellery today, the one who's been telling you he's single, he's married to me for 2 years, and he just abandoned me in a grocery store parking lot to run to you." I heard a sharp intake of breath, then muffled crying. "Oh my God," she sobbed. "Oh my God, I had no idea. He told me he was divorced, that it was finalized months ago. I would never... I'm not that kind of person. I believe you, I said, and surprisingly, I did. But Sarah, you need to know something else. If he did this to me, if he could lie this elaborately, this completely, what makes you think he won't do it to you? She was quiet for a long moment. Then, what do you want me to do? I want you to remember this conversation. I want you to remember that Marcus Reed is a coward and a liar. And when he inevitably breaks your heart, I want you to remember that you had fair warning. I hung up before she could respond. The call wasn't about revenge, not yet. It was about planting seeds. Seeds that would grow into doubt, into questions, into the slow erosion of whatever fantasy Marcus was trying to build with her. The divorce papers arrived 4 days later, delivered by a courier who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I signed them without reading them, my signature sharp and decisive. I wanted out of that marriage as much as Marcus did, but I wanted it on my terms. My lawyer, Janet Morrison, was a shark in a Chanel suit. She'd handled my friend Rebecca's messy divorce 2 years earlier, and Rebecca had warned me, Janet doesn't just win cases. She destroys opposing counsel and then bills them for the privilege. He wants to settle quickly, Janet told me, reading through Marcus's demands. He's offering you half the house value, half the savings, and he'll take responsibility for his own debts. What's he hiding? I asked, because I'd learned that when someone wants a quick, easy divorce, they're usually hiding something. Janet smiled, and it was predatory. That's exactly what we're going to find out. The discovery process was brutal and beautiful. Marcus had been sloppy, arrogant in his assumption that I'd be too heartbroken to fight back. He'd forgotten that I'd handled our finances for 2 years, that I knew every account, every investment, every hidden expense. What we found was a man who'd been planning his exit for months, secret credit cards used to wine and dine Sarah, a second phone plan, expensive hotels charged to his business account that, coincidentally, matched days he'd told me he was working late. But the most damning evidence was the apartment lease, signed 3 weeks before he'd abandoned me, with both his and Sarah's names on it. 3 weeks. He'd been planning to leave me for 3 weeks while I was making anniversary dinner plans. He's been living a double life, Janet said, spreading the evidence across her mahogany desk like a general planning a war. This gives us leverage. Adultery, financial deception, abandonment. We can take him for everything he's worth. But I surprised her. No, I said quietly. Give him what he wants. Quick, clean, easy. Janet stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Emma, we can bury him. Why would you walk away from this? Because, I said, thinking of Sarah's tears, of Marcus's cowardice, of the long game I was already starting to play. Sometimes the best revenge requires patience. Sometimes you have to let your enemy think they've won before you show them what losing really looks like. The divorce was finalised on a Tuesday. Marcus got his freedom, his fresh start, and his guilty conscience. I got something far more valuable. I got angry. I threw myself into work with the intensity of a woman possessed. The marketing firm where I'd been coasting as a mid-level executive suddenly had my full attention. I worked 16-hour days, took on projects no one else wanted, and made myself indispensable. Within 6 months, I'd been promoted. Within a year, I was running my own team. But work was just the foundation. The real transformation was happening outside the office. I hired a personal trainer, a former Marine named Derek, who showed no mercy and accepted no excuses. "You want to be strong?" he asked during our first session. "Then you're going to earn it." I earned it. Every push-up, every mile run, every weight lifted was a declaration of war against the woman who'd waited in that parking lot. I shed 30 pounds of marriage weight and gained muscles I didn't know I had. I cut my hair into a sharp bob that made me look dangerous, and bought clothes that made me feel powerful. The therapist was Dr. Eleanor Vasquez, a woman who looked like she could stare down demons and win. "You're not here to get over Marcus," she told me during our third session. "You're here to figure out who you are without him." "I don't know who that is," I admitted. "Good," she said. "That means you get to decide." I decided to become formidable. I took classes, cooking, languages, self-defense. I learned to change a tire, fix a leaky faucet, and negotiate like a shark. I read books about psychology, about manipulation, about the art of war. I studied my enemy because Marcus was my enemy now, even if he didn't know it yet. Through mutual friends, I kept tabs on his new life. He and Sarah had moved in together, and apparently the honeymoon phase was everything he'd hoped for. He was posting pictures on social media, something he'd never done when we were married, showing off his new girlfriend like a trophy. But I noticed things. Sarah looked tired in the later photos. There were fewer couple pictures and more solo shots of Marcus at bars, at parties, at places where serious boyfriends don't usually go alone. The comments from his friends were telling too. Lots of "living your best life" and "freedom suits you" that suggested they all knew exactly what kind of man he was. A year after our divorce, I ran into Marcus at a charity gala. I almost didn't recognize him. He looked older, softer, like success wasn't sitting well on his shoulders. But he recognized me immediately, and the look in his eyes was pure shock. "Emma," he said, his voice uncertain, "you look different." "I am different," I replied, my voice cool as winter air. "Divorce suits me." He flinched like I'd slapped him. "I heard about your promotion. Congratulations." "Thank you," I said, not returning the courtesy. "I heard about Sarah. How's that working out for you?" His smile faltered. "It's good. Really good." "I'm sure it is," I said, but my tone suggested I knew exactly how good it wasn't. He stood there awkwardly, probably expecting me to be bitter, to make a scene, to give him some kind of reaction that would confirm he'd made the right choice. Instead, I gave him nothing. I was a glacier, beautiful, powerful, and completely unmoved by his presence. "Well," he said finally, "I should get back to Sarah. She's here with me." "Is she?" I looked around the crowded ballroom. "I don't see her." "She's powder room," he mumbled. I smiled then, and it was sharp as a blade. "Of course she is. Some things never change, do they, Marcus? You're still the same man who leaves women waiting while you figure out your next move." He opened his mouth to respond, but I was already walking away. I'd said what I needed to say, planted the seeds I needed to plant. The rest would take care of itself. And it did. Within 3 months, Marcus and Sarah had broken up. According to Rebecca, who'd heard it from her husband, who'd heard it from Marcus's brother, the relationship had imploded spectacularly. Apparently, Sarah had started asking questions about his previous marriage, about his pattern of behaviour, about whether she could trust a man who'd abandoned his wife for her. Smart girl. She'd learned from our conversation after all. Marcus spiralled after that. He tried dating, but word gets around in our social circle. Women talk, and the story of the man who'd abandoned his wife in a parking lot wasn't exactly a selling point. He threw himself into work, into the gym, into anything that would distract him from the growing realization that he'd thrown away something real for something that was never going to last. But I wasn't satisfied. Not yet. Because Marcus still thought he'd won. He still believed he'd made the right choice, that he'd escaped a boring marriage for a more exciting life. He had no idea that his real punishment was just beginning. That's when fate decided to intervene in the most delicious way possible. Marcus's company was acquired by a larger firm, the same firm where I'd just been promoted to senior vice president. The same firm where I now had influence, connections, and a reputation as someone you didn't want to cross. Marcus was being transferred to our city, to our office, to work in a department that would report directly to me. When I saw his name on the transfer list, I smiled. Not the bitter smile of a woman seeking petty revenge, but the satisfied smile of a chess player who'd just seen the perfect move. Marcus was coming home, and I was going to be there to welcome him. Marcus walked into my office on a Monday morning in October, 3 years after he'd left me stranded in that parking lot. He was wearing his best suit, the navy one I'd helped him pick out for job interviews, back when I still believed in us, and carrying a leather briefcase that screamed "trying too hard." His hair was perfectly styled, his smile was practiced, and his confidence was about to be shattered. "Emma." His voice cracked slightly on my name, like he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. You're my new supervisor." I looked up from my computer, letting a beat of silence stretch between us before I spoke. "Hello, Marcus. Welcome to Morrison & Associates. Please, have a seat." He sat down slowly, his eyes never leaving my face. I could see him trying to process this twist of fate, trying to figure out how the broken woman he'd abandoned had become the powerful executive sitting across from him in a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. "I had no idea you worked here," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "When they told me about the transfer, they just said I'd be reporting to the Senior VP of Strategic Development." "And here I am," I replied, my smile sharp as a razor. "Congratulations on your new position, Marcus. I'm sure you'll find working here educational." What followed was the most exquisite form of torture I could have designed. Marcus was good at his job. I had to give him that, but he was no longer the confident man who'd thought he could discard people like used tissues. Every day, he had to sit in meetings with me, take direction from me, watch me command respect from colleagues who hung on my every word. I was never cruel. I was never unprofessional. I was simply perfect. I gave him challenging assignments that pushed his abilities to the limit. I praised his successes publicly and addressed his failures privately, always maintaining the exact tone of disappointed mentorship that would eat away at his ego most effectively. "The Henderson account proposal needs a complete revision," I told him during one of our weekly one-on-ones. "The client feedback suggests they found your approach pedestrian." Marcus flinched. "Pedestrian?" "Their word, not mine," I said, sliding the feedback across my desk. "Perhaps you could collaborate with Jennifer on the next draft. She has some innovative ideas that might elevate your work." Jennifer was 26, brilliant, and everything Marcus used to think he deserved. Watching him struggle to take direction from someone younger and more talented than him was poetry in motion. But the real masterpiece was yet to come. 6 months into Marcus's employment at my company, I started dating David Chen, a successful architect who treated me like the queen I'd become. David was everything Marcus wasn't: confident without being arrogant, successful without being flashy, and completely devoted to me without being possessive. He brought me flowers every Friday, remembered the names of my friends, and never once made me feel like I was asking for too much when I asked for his attention. I made sure Marcus knew about David, not through obvious displays, but through careful mentions in casual conversation. "I'm sorry, I can't stay late tonight. David and I have dinner reservations." "That's an interesting point, Marcus. David was just saying something similar about his latest project." "Oh, David gave me this necklace for our 6-month anniversary. Isn't it lovely?" I watched Marcus's face every time I mentioned David's name, watched him realize that I hadn't just survived without him. I'd thrived. I'd found someone better, someone who valued me, someone who would never leave me waiting in a parking lot because he was too cowardly to face difficult conversations. The breaking point came during our company's annual Christmas party. Marcus had been drinking, not heavily but enough to loosen his tongue and lower his inhibitions. He cornered me by the bar while David was networking across the room. "You look happy," he said, and there was something raw in his voice, something vulnerable that reminded me of the man I'd once loved. "I am happy," I replied simply. "I made a mistake," he said, the words tumbling out like he'd been holding them back for months. "Emma, I made the biggest mistake of my life. I threw away the best thing that ever happened to me because I was scared and stupid, and I thought the grass was greener somewhere else." I looked at him for a long moment, studying his face. He looked older, wearier, like the weight of his choices was finally catching up with him. "Yes, I said quietly. "You did." "Is there any chance," he started, then stopped, swallowing hard. "Is there any chance we could try again? I know I don't deserve it. I know I hurt you, but I've learned from my mistakes. I'm not the same man who left you in that parking lot." "No," I said, my voice steady as stone. "You're not the same man, and I'm not the same woman. The Emma who loved you is dead, Marcus. You killed her when you drove away that night." His face crumpled. "Emma, please! I know I hurt you, but—" "You don't know anything," I interrupted, my voice rising just enough to cut through his desperation. "You think you hurt me? Marcus, you destroyed me. You took a woman who loved you unconditionally, and you threw her away like garbage. You made her question everything she thought she knew about love and trust and marriage. You left her standing in a parking lot at midnight, wondering what she'd done wrong, wondering if she was worthy of love." Tears were streaming down his face now, and I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no pity, no residual love, just nothing. "But you know what?" I continued, my voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more weight than shouting. "You did me a favour, because that woman was weak. She was naive. She settled for scraps of affection from a man who didn't deserve her. And when you destroyed her, something better rose from the ashes. Emma!" "I'm not finished." My voice was ice. "You want to know what your mistake cost you? Look around this room. Look at the woman you threw away. I'm successful. I'm powerful. I'm respected. I'm loved by a man who would walk through fire for me. And you? You're working for me. You're taking orders from me. You're watching me live the life you could have shared if you'd been man enough to fight for our marriage instead of running away like a coward." Marcus was sobbing now, right there in the middle of our company Christmas party, and I felt absolutely nothing. "Emma, I'm begging you, give me another chance. Let me prove I've changed." I looked across the room at David, who was watching us with concern in his eyes. When he saw me looking, he smiled. That warm, genuine smile that told me I was safe, that I was loved, that I would never have to wonder if he was coming back. "Marcus," I said, turning back to my ex-husband, "I wouldn't take you back if you were the last man on earth. You had your chance, you threw it away, and some things, once broken, can never be fixed." I walked away from him then, crossed the room to David, and kissed him deeply while Marcus watched. When we broke apart, David raised an eyebrow. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Perfect," I said, and meant it. But Marcus wasn't done. Over the next few weeks, he became increasingly desperate. Flowers appeared on my desk with notes begging for forgiveness. He tried to corner me in elevators, in parking garages, anywhere he could get me alone. He sent emails that walked the line between professional and personal, trying to remind me of good times we'd shared. I documented everything, every flower, every note, every inappropriate conversation. I was building a case, not because I planned to use it, but because I wanted Marcus to understand that I was always 3 steps ahead of him now. The final straw came when he showed up at my apartment building on a Saturday night, drunk and belligerent, demanding to see me. The doorman called the police, and Marcus spent the night in jail for disturbing the peace. On Monday morning, I called him into my office. Your behaviour has become unacceptable, I said, my voice deadly calm. You're creating a hostile work environment, and your personal issues are affecting your professional performance. Emma, please, just listen to me. I've listened enough, I cut him off. You have two choices. You can transfer to our Denver office, effective immediately, or you can resign. Those are your only options. Marcus stared at me in shock. You can't do this. You can't use your position to... I can, and I am. I slid a folder across my desk. Everything is documented, Marcus. Every inappropriate conversation, every unwanted advance, every violation of professional boundaries. HR is fully aware of the situation. He opened the folder and paled as he saw the evidence I'd collected. This is revenge, he whispered. No, I said, standing up and walking to the window. Revenge would be destroying your career, ruining your reputation, making sure you never worked in this industry again. This is mercy. This is me giving you a chance to start over somewhere else, away from the woman whose life you tried to destroy. I turned back to face him. Choose quickly, Marcus. The Denver position starts Monday, and I'm not a patient woman anymore. He chose Denver. Of course he did. He was still a coward, still taking the path of least resistance, still running away from the consequences of his actions. But I wasn't finished with him yet, not even close. Because 3 months after Marcus left for Denver, David got down on one knee in the same restaurant where Marcus and I had had our first date. And when David slipped that ring on my finger, a ring that was everything Marcus's had never been, beautiful and thoughtful and chosen specifically for me, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I was going to invite Marcus to my wedding. I was going to make him watch me marry a man who was everything he'd never been. I was going to let him see what real love looked like, what commitment meant, what it felt like to be chosen every single day by someone who understood my worth. And then, at the very last moment, I was going to show him what it felt like to be abandoned. The invitation I sent to Marcus was beautiful, cream-coloured paper with gold lettering, elegant and expensive. Emma Sullivan and David Chen request the pleasure of your company. I included a handwritten note. I hope you can make it, Marcus. It would mean so much to have you there on the most important day of my life. He RSVP'd yes within 24 hours. Of course he did. He probably thought it was some kind of olive branch, some indication that I'd forgiven him and wanted him to be a part of my new happiness. He had no idea that he was walking straight into the most perfect trap I'd ever designed. The morning of my wedding dawned crisp and clear, the kind of perfect October day that makes you believe in fairy tales. I stood in the bridal suite of the Grand Meridian Hotel, surrounded by my bridesmaids, watching them fuss over every detail of my appearance. My dress was a masterpiece, custom-designed ivory silk that hugged every curve I'd earned through years of transforming myself into someone worthy of real love. "You look absolutely radiant," my sister Claire said, adjusting my veil for the 100th time. "David is going to lose his mind when he sees you." But I wasn't thinking about David in that moment. I was thinking about Marcus, who was probably getting dressed in his hotel room, 3 floors below, carefully knotting the tie he'd wear to watch me marry another man. He'd flown in from Denver the night before, and according to my carefully planted sources, he'd been asking everyone about the wedding details, where exactly we were having the ceremony, what time it started, whether there would be a receiving line. He was so eager to be a part of my special day. How sweet. Emma? My maid of honour, Jessica, was holding up 2 different lipsticks. The bold red or the classic rose. The red, I said without hesitation. Today is a day for bold choices. At 2:30 p.m, 30 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin, I received the text I'd been waiting for. "He's here. Front row, left side, exactly where you said he'd sit. He looks nervous. Perfect. Marcus always did like to arrive early to important events. Probably some misguided attempt to show respect or demonstrate his reliability. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who'd left me waiting in a parking lot was now waiting for me. The church was packed, just as I'd planned. David's family filled the right side, doctors and lawyers and professors, all beaming with pride for their golden boy who'd found his perfect match. My side was a mix of colleagues, old friends, and family members who'd watched me rise from the ashes of my first marriage like a phoenix. And there, in the front row left side, sat Marcus. He looked good. I had to admit that. The years had been kinder to him than he deserved, though I could see the lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and regret. He was wearing a black suit with a silver tie, and he kept checking his watch, glancing toward the back of the church with an expression I knew well. Anticipation mixed with anxiety, the look of a man who was about to witness something that would change everything. He had no idea how right he was. The organ music began to play, and I watched through the crack in the door as the wedding party made their entrance. My bridesmaids floated down the aisle in deep burgundy dresses, followed by my flower girl, David's adorable 6-year-old niece who took her job very seriously, carefully placing each petal exactly where it belonged. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. The wedding march filled the cathedral, and every head turned toward the back doors where I was supposed to appear. The congregation rose to their feet as one, a sea of expectant faces ready to witness the union of Emma Sullivan and David Chen. But I wasn't there. Instead, I was already in my car, driving away from the church in my wedding dress, my veil flowing behind me like a banner of victory. I'd slipped out through the side entrance while everyone's attention was focused on the front doors, leaving behind a church full of confused guests and one very bewildered groom. But this wasn't about hurting David. David was never supposed to be at that altar. 20 minutes earlier, while my bridesmaids were doing final touch-ups in the bridal suite, I'd sent David a text. Emergency at the church. Meet me in the rose garden behind the rectory. Come alone. Don't let anyone see you. Trust me. David, being the trusting, wonderful man he was, had slipped out without question. He was waiting for me in the garden, probably checking his watch and wondering what emergency could be important enough to risk being late to our own wedding. There was no emergency, of course. There was just me, finally ready to tell him the truth. Emma? David's face lit up when he saw me approaching through the garden archway, then immediately shifted to concern. What's wrong? You said there was an emergency? There is, I said, stopping a few feet away from him. Even in crisis, even dressed in my wedding gown in a garden, instead of at an altar, David looked at me like I was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. It broke my heart and strengthened my resolve at the same time. David, I began, my voice steady despite the magnitude of what I was about to do. I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen to the whole story before you react. He nodded, his brow furrowed with worry. Of course, whatever it is, we can handle it together. Together? The word hit me like a physical blow, because I knew that in about 10 minutes, there would be no more together for us. 5 years ago, I said, my first husband abandoned me in a grocery store parking lot. He left me there at night, alone, while he ran away to start a new life with another woman. It destroyed me, David. It broke something inside me that I didn't think could ever be fixed. David's expression softened with sympathy. Emma, you don't have to... Yes, I do. I held up my hand to stop him. Because what I built from that destruction, what I became after that night, it wasn't just about healing. It was about revenge. Cold, calculated, patient revenge. I told him everything. About tracking Marcus's life, about engineering his transfer to my company, about the psychological warfare I'd waged for months, about the invitation to our wedding that was never meant to be a wedding at all, but the final act in a 5-year pun's land for the perfect revenge. Right now, I continued, watching David's face grow paler with each revelation, Marcus is sitting in that church waiting to watch me marry you. He thinks he's witnessing my happily ever after, probably torturing himself with thoughts of what he lost. In about 5 minutes, he's going to realise that there is no wedding, that the bride isn't coming, that he's been played more completely than he ever played me. David stared at me for a long moment, processing everything I'd told him. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet and hurt. So none of this was real? Our relationship, our engagement, all of it was just... what? Part of your revenge plan? No, I said quickly, desperately, because this was the part that mattered most. David, what we have is the most real thing I've ever experienced. I love you more than I ever thought it was possible to love another person. You saved me, put me back together piece by piece, showed me what real love looks like. But, he prompted because he could hear it in my voice, but I can't marry you while I'm still carrying this poison inside me. I can't start our life together built on a foundation of lies and revenge. You deserve better than that. You deserve a woman who can love you without shadows, without ulterior motives, without using you as a weapon against someone else. David was quiet for a long time, looking at me in my wedding dress in that beautiful garden, both of us knowing our fairy tale was ending before it had really begun. What happens now? He asked finally. Now, you decide if you can forgive me for using our love as a part of my revenge. And I decide if I can forgive myself for letting my past poison the best thing that ever happened to me. Back at the church, chaos was erupting. According to the text updates I was receiving from Jessica, who was the only person who knew the truth, the congregation had been waiting for 20 minutes. Marcus kept looking around frantically, probably wondering if something had happened to me, if this was some kind of emergency. The irony was delicious. He was experiencing exactly what I had felt in that parking lot, the growing realization that someone wasn't coming back. But then something unexpected happened, something I hadn't planned for in my carefully orchestrated revenge. Marcus stood up, in front of 200 confused wedding guests, in front of David's family and my friends and colleagues. He walked to the front of the church and took the microphone from the very confused priest. I know this is unusual, his voice echoed through the cathedral, but I think I know why Emma isn't here. And I think I'm the reason why. The crowd murmured with confusion, but Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. 5 years ago, I made the worst decision of my life. I abandoned my wife, Emma, in a grocery store parking lot because I was too much of a coward to face the problems in our marriage. I left her standing there alone, wondering what she'd done wrong, wondering if she was worth loving. I destroyed a good woman because I was selfish and weak and stupid. The gasps from the congregation were audible. David's mother looked like she might faint, but Marcus kept talking. Emma built herself into something magnificent after I broke her. She became successful, powerful, respected, everything she always had the potential to be, but couldn't reach while she was carrying the dead weight of a marriage to me. She found real love with David, and she deserves every bit of happiness she's found. His voice cracked slightly. But I think she invited me here today to show me what I lost, to make me watch her marry a better man, to give me a taste of what it feels like to be abandoned. And you know what? I deserve it. I deserve all of it, and more. Marcus looked directly into the camera that was recording the ceremony. Our videographer was still running, capturing this surreal moment for posterity. Emma, if you're watching this, I want you to know that I'm sorry. Not just for leaving you, but for forcing you to carry the poison of what I did for all these years. You don't need to hurt me to heal yourself. You're already free. You've already won. You became everything I never deserved, and you found love I could never give you." He set the microphone down and walked out of the church, leaving behind a congregation of stunned guests and one very confused groom who was still missing. I watched the video of Marcus's speech 3 times before I made my decision. I drove to the airport, still in my wedding dress, and bought a ticket to Paris. Not because I was running away, but because I was finally ready to stop running toward revenge and start running toward something better. I sent David a text from the plane. "Give me 6 months to figure out who I am without the poison. If you still want to marry me when I get back, ask me again. But ask Emma, not the woman who's been carrying Marcus around like a ghost for 5 years." David texted back immediately. "I'll be waiting. Not in a parking lot, not at an altar where you might not show up, but wherever you need me to be when you're ready." That's when I knew I'd found something worth more than revenge. I'd found a man who understood that sometimes love means letting someone go so they can come back whole. 6 months later, David proposed to me again. Not in a grand gesture, not in front of anyone else, but in our kitchen on a Tuesday morning while I was making coffee. The ring was different, simpler, more us, less about proving anything to anyone else. "Emma," he said, getting down on one knee in his pajamas, "will you marry me, not as revenge against your past, not as a statement to anyone else, but just because you love me and want to build a life together?" I said yes, and this time I showed up. Marcus sent a wedding gift, a card that simply said, "Thank you for teaching me that some mistakes can't be fixed, only learned from. Be happy." I never saw him again. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he moved to Seattle, started therapy, and eventually found someone who could love him despite his past. I hoped it was true, not because I forgave him. Forgiveness was still a work in progress, but because I'd learned that carrying hate is like drinking poison and expecting someone else to die. The woman who waited in that parking lot 5 years ago finally got her revenge. But it wasn't the revenge she'd planned. It was better. It was freedom.